Hello and welcome to Time Extend. My name is Adam Ismail, and boy, do we have a show for you today. Who's with me?
So you've got Brendan Robertson, of course, your usual beautiful co-host. I'm here, but we also have others.
Yes, hi, I'm Jordan Greer, the founder of GT Planet.
Kyle Patrick, editor at GT Planet.
And I'm Andrew Evans, one of the administrators and writer of Indigo at GT Planet.
And having three GT Planet people on one show can only mean one thing, and that is that, yes, we are talking about Gran Turismo, and we are ranking Gran Turismo. This has been a very highly requested, well, I don't know about highly requested. I feel like maybe we've been requesting it more than anyone else, but this has been the show that's been a long time in the works since back before Time Extend actually started, when Brendan and I were writing more for GT Planet, and we had lots of debates among the editorial staff about ranking our favorite games in the series, which often turned to tears and insults, and it's amazing our friendships could all recover to the point where we could all be together on this show today.
Yeah, we'll see how long that lasts.
Not very long, I'll guess.
Giving it 10 minutes.
I'm listening to the tearing up of contract.
I mean, all this is being recorded, so, you know, it's probably admissible into a court of law if anyone feels like they've been slandered or their reputation has probably been harmed by this. But we'll leave that for afterwards. So basically, the structure of this is going to be a little bit different than the previous rankings that we've done. Because we're all here, and there's a story that we'll probably link to in the bio that we did all these years ago, where we ranked the Gran Turismo games, and we all feel very strongly about that. So rather than focusing on the games that we don't really think should be among the best, we're going to focus on our favorites, which are going to come down to 3 games. And I guess, you know, we'll briefly run through, before we get into the positives, why certain titles aren't on the list. Brendan, you know, I know we've talked a lot about our favorite Gran Turismos, and it's fair to say there's not a straight up bad game in the series. It's just, it almost seems like there's like 2 tiers, right?
Yeah, for sure. When it comes to Gran Turismo, like, in terms of other racing game series, nothing really comes close to the level of quality, but within the series itself, there have been games that maybe weren't thought of so well at the time, and then people's opinions have changed, or rather, just at the time they were disappointing after a huge cycle of hype. But it makes sense to focus on the games in the series that are generally regarded to be the best, and I think the ones that we'll discuss in great detail are the ones people actually want to hear about.
Right. So basically, the ones we're not going to spend too much time on, and I'm sorry for listeners who would rank these games among their highest, are the first Gran Turismo, GT5, GT6, and GT Sport. You know, it's actually the one I feel the worst about leaving off of this is GT Sport, because, like, I really have grown to love Gran Turismo Sport, and it's, you know, with all the support it's had, and with the different direction it took with the series, it really blossomed into something, you know, beautiful after a period of time. But it's not really what you imagine, what you think of when you think of, like, quintessential Gran Turismo. I mean, would you guys agree?
Yeah, I would personally agree. I think that would be a topic that could be discussed at length in an entire another episode of the show, is what is Gran Turismo Sport and how does it fit into the overall series. You know, I agree. I think it's too different to really consider it, and you know, it doesn't have a number at the end of it. So, despite what Kazunori says, it does not feel like a mainline Gran Turismo release.
I agree with Jordan on that. I think it's really good, and like Adam said, it's grown over the past almost 2 years, and it's really become something different. And what it does really well, but it's still not. When you think of Gran Turismo, it's not what comes to mind. It's getting there, but it's still so far removed with that focus on online racing. And I think the other tough thing with that, and with GT5 and GT6, is that they've evolved, right? Like when we're comparing these 3 games that we'll talk about later, the good ones, the greatest ones, those are a snapshot and they never changed over their release, whereas, GT Sport is constantly evolving. It's hard to really place it.
The GT Sport's grown, for me, into a game that's more like my favourite in the series. It's more focused, more compact. They're doing more with less. There's also the online aspect, but the issue I have with it, if we're doing this in 20 years' time, are we going to be playing Gran Turismo Sport and looking back on it and thinking fondly of it, or will it be completely inoperable because it's entirely online? As soon as they turn the servers off, that's the game dead.
Yeah, I mean that is the big issue with just, this medium in general right now is, in addition to the fact that we're talking about racing games and you always have to worry about licenses and that often prevents games from being re-released and whatnot. The fact that the life of this game is online. I mean, when the servers go dead, you can't do anything as it is. So yeah, will the game even be playable in, this time 5 years from now or whenever the PS5 comes out after that life cycle is most of the way through? I don't know. But it's kind of a shame to think about. So I don't want to dwell on it, but well, right now you can play Gran Turismo Sport, and if you haven't, you should. But if you're listening to this, you probably have. So, yeah. With that said, I mean, I'm sure we will discuss the other games in the series in relation to our favorites as we go through this. But let's just get right into it. So, coming in, the Bama podium, 3rd place finish on our list is Gran Turismo 2, which really breaks my heart because it's not my number 1, but it's probably my number 2, and I feel like some people would say it's nostalgia talking, and they might be right, but damn, I mean, this was the first Gran Turismo I really fell in love with.
Well, it's the greatest game ever made, so
It's coming in soft here.
Yeah. No, you're right for feeling that. I think Gran Turismo 2 is, to me, it's the quintessential Gran Turismo game, and it's the one that set the standard. It's when we were talking about why Gran Turismo Sport doesn't feel like a mainline game. It's because it doesn't feel like Gran Turismo 2, and I feel like that is the game against which every other Gran Turismo title is compared with. And we say, when we say we like GT4, or we talk about GT3, or we talk about GT5 or anything like that, it always comes back to whether or not we say it or not, everybody is mentally comparing it to Gran Turismo 2. That's why it is the best.
That's a bold take. Just the fact that it's a point of comparison. I don't think I've ever heard anyone say that before.
Yeah, it's a reference point, in my opinion. It's the mark against which all others are judged. And when we say GT3 is a smaller game, a more focused game, why are we saying that? That's because we're comparing it against what GT2 was.
That's true.
When we talk about how great GT4 was, we're saying it was great because it was like Gran Turismo 2. That's why I think it's the best. That's why I think it's the benchmark.
I mean, in the aspect of the content of the game, GT2 did kind of set the standard for what Gran become. There was 600 odd cars in dozens, scores of tracks, and that's pretty much what we think of today when we think of Gran Turismo. And then, obviously, when Sport came along a couple of years ago, we're all thinking, oh, content's been cut and so much less. And Jordan has a point that we are comparing it, what Gran Turismo became as of the second game.
Yeah, it never ceases to amaze me. I feel like people don't give GT2 enough credit for how big it was when it came out. They wouldn't surpass the car count of this game until GT4 came out. And it's just astonishing to think about, especially because this game came out. It was like a year and a half or a 2-year development turnaround after GT1. So, Gran Turismo 1 came out, I think it had like 140 cars or something to that number. And Gran Turismo 2 like triples it or quadruples it. And also has way more tracks as well. And when Gran Turismo 1 came out, in Japan, I think it really only had Japanese makes and models. And then when they released it in other parts of the world, they were able to include, other makes from other countries like TVR and Dodge and Aston Martin and whatnot. But by the time you get to GT2, this has already become a global thing. It's already got this international flavor to it in a way that I played this game when I was really little, and I didn't know these companies existed. I didn't know these manufacturers existed until I played Gran Turismo 2, and even just like the little it's such a small thing, but just the traveling in the menu to the West City and the North City and the East City and stuff, it really felt like you were experiencing different spheres of car culture in a way that was never possible before. Not even Gran Turismo 1 didn't do it, no game before it did. And I just feel like this really, a lot like GT4, to your point, Jordan, actually ended up educating a lot of people about automotive history, which is a pretty amazing thing for we're talking about a PlayStation 1 game.
Yeah, I think you summed it up perfectly right there of why the game for me personally was so moving, I guess you could say, because it just opened my eyes to so much, and so much of this automotive world that I didn't know existed. And both of us being Americans, I think our automotive worlds were much smaller, and maybe for the younger listeners, they may not understand what everything was like before we had ubiquitous internet and YouTube videos of every best motoring episode ever. The world was a lot smaller back then, and nothing else had ever really existed like Gran Turismo 2 that had such an international flair, such an international character, and that was really a remarkable thing. And yeah, the first game, like you said, it was very Japanese focused. I think the cool thing about that is it was kind of like, let's see if people want to play this game with real cars, and it was great, and that was a big moment on its own. But Gran Turismo 2 sort of changed things and expanded things in such a significant way that it just completely overshadows the first one, in my opinion. And I think that a lot of people, if you could talk to a lot of really influential car people out there right now in the world, people that are, roughly our age in their 20s and 30s, I think it's kind of a common thread that Gran Turismo 2 is what opened their eyes in so many ways to what the automotive world can be. And that's a hard thing to do. There's not many things that we can say had that kind of impact.
Jordan really nailed what I was going to say about it. I don't remember where I personally ranked GT2. I know it wasn't my top one, but to its defense, it brought a whole world to us. I was living on dial-up internet back then, so finding all these cars in the game, like Venturi or Roof, it was just a whole learning experience for me that I think really did set the tone for Gran Turismo being an encyclopedia approach to cars and teaching people as much as it is about driving them. Whereas GT1, like you said earlier, was very focused on Japanese models outside of a few exceptions. So that, in that way, GT2 really is the bar for the rest of the franchise in that one respect.
Yeah, so I don't want everybody to pile on Jordan right now. Some of us rank GT2 as high and as highly as the others, and I'm just wondering why that might be. Brendan, you've been quiet, so I'm dragging you into this.
No, I've just been trying to process my feelings because I had a feeling this question was going to come up. I love Gran Turismo 2 a lot. It's probably the game in the series that really did make me a proper Gran Turismo fan. By the time 3 rolled around, it was because of 2 I was such a big fan. And especially one of the things I like to call out is the kind of race modifications that were in the game. Like, that was just so cool, taking regular street cars and creating like racing machines out of them. And it's something I wish we kind of got again. And it has kind of popped up in a sense in later games, as in you could just get racing versions of cars, or even if you consider GT Sport and the livery editor, it's the same kind of idea without all the cool race mods, of course. But the reason it isn't my absolute favourite, which goes rightfully to Gran Turismo 3, by the way, is because I just feel as if when you think of what was capable on the PlayStation 1, Gran Turismo 2 did achieve that. And this is why it's kind of an awkward one to talk about without dragging in 3. I feel as if in terms of a milestone effort, 3 just had a lot more fun content, and it was also more impressive from a visual standpoint and just how focused it was. And that always feels like a kind of crutch argument almost. I get that, why people would say that GT2 is more content and it's just as playable and it's good fun. But I just feel as if GT2 maybe lacked in the polish department slightly, and that for me brings it down a notch.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say from a polish standpoint, just because, as we were talking about before, how little time they had to push this game out, and also the fact that it was on the PS1. I mean, I always had this feeling with Gran Turismo that the series couldn't be, everything. And I don't think this is unusual to say, but it couldn't be everything it was meant to be. It couldn't realize its potential, until it got to the PS2. And like, Gran Turismo 1 and 2 are amazing achievements, but they're almost amazing achievements largely in spite of the fact, like, because they were on those consoles, and that nobody else, no other developer at that time was able to produce something that achieved the level of realism that GT was achieving on the PS1 in the late 90s. So it is kind of awkward to talk about, because it's almost like you're saying, like, no, well, this game was only good because it was good in comparison to everything else at the time, which was bad. But it really does stand up on its own merits. And I think, like, even though obviously it's not realistic anymore from a physics department, the game is still rock solid. I mean, I still have fun playing GT2. Like, the handling is by no means, realistic, but it almost has become like a good arcade racer after all these years. And yeah, so it's one of those things, like, they obviously couldn't do everything they wanted to do on this console, but the fact that they were able to push this out is just, it's only becomes more and more magnificent, the further away we get from it.
I'm glad you brought up the, like, arcade argument about it becoming an arcade game almost, because one of the definitive ways to experience GT2 now, from my perspective, is somehow, and I'm not sure how this would be possible, playing it on the PSP and having access to all of the endurance races and stuff in an arcade racer, as in at the time it was realistic but not so much now, and it was so perfectly suited to that handheld device that it's helped its age for me in a way, because it almost feels as if it was built for that type of thing. Like, it holds up so well because the handling hasn't really got bad over time. It's just become more simple, like you were saying.
Oh, so many things I want to say.
It's so little time.
so little time. Yeah, but I mean, are we gonna talk about games in terms of their impact at the time they were released, or are we going to look at them sort of retrospectively? Because, at the time, at the era that Gran Turismo 2 was released, I think it had a bigger impact than GT3 or any of the others, and yes, its handling, I mean, its handling is obviously outdated. It feels more arcade now, but it was really, really good at the time. And we didn't have the wheels. We didn't have, the fancy pedal sets and stuff like we do now. So I think the fact that it's aged so well is just another reason that.
Well, I am curious about Andrew's feelings on this, because I know that you rate GT3 very highly and that Gran Turismo 4 felt a little bit too bloated to you. So do you feel that with GT2 as well?
With GT2, and I think Bren touched on this earlier, that it was really a lack of polish that that did it for me. So I mean, it's a terrific. I mean, I played Gran Turismo 2 instead of doing the second and third years of my degree, so it's not like I wasn't obsessed with it. I mean, that's fairly accurate. But yeah, there were so many areas where it was just a little bit. There was not quite enough attention had been paid to bit bobs, and I understand that Polyphony was smaller. It's developed this reputation for polish, or as we'd say in the motoring world, fit and finish. But it was lacking slightly in that department. So it had all these wonderful, amazing cars, and you would go and buy one, say, for example, the Mini, which had 63 horsepower. You would buy the Mini and find it would have 200 horsepower because it was actually a rally version of it. You'd upgrade the suspension, be replaced in the settings menu. I can't even remember what it said, but obviously some kind of location of the file where the suspension settings were, rather than what the suspension. Yeah.
It just adds charm. It's character. It adds character.
Yeah. Like, you'd have a look at, let's say, some of the menus where you could enter a race, and things wouldn't quite be aligned properly. And it was just that it was with GT3 that Polyphony kind of really got the focus on making the whole game look as good as it made the cars look and the track environment.
It's something I've thought a lot about in the years since I really took an interest in learning about Gran Turismo 2, because it's this game that's actually packed with all this content that never made it to release. And, as I've said so many times, there's this amazing thread on GT Planet that's been running since 2006 where people are unpacking files and exploring the game data of GT2. And it's turned me on to so many interesting things I didn't know were there. And so many also weird glitches and ideas that never came to pass, and all these like quirky things and awful translations with the car, bios and everything like that. And it is very unpolished, and that probably wouldn't fly today. But for whatever reason, I love that stuff in GT2, like because it just. I mean, I guess, it did suck that you couldn't 100% the game when it first came out, and you could only get to 98. But I mean, there's something to what Jordan's saying. It's part of the charm.
But that's another thing. The GT2 was the first game to have 3 different versions. It was released with 3 different versions within the US because you couldn't complete it, and then later on you could, and then later in you could get 102% in the game. So it's not that it's a bad game per se, but when I look back on it and think of the many hours I spent playing it instead of studying, it's just the polished. I don't want to say it tarnishes it, because that's kind of really wringing the metaphor out. But there was just that slight lack of polish that it's not synonymous with what Gran Turismo has since become.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. Well, given that we spent probably a good 20 minutes on GT2, we should probably move on. But are there any final thoughts? Anything anybody wanted to touch on before we turn away from Gran Turismo 2 and never return again?
I just have a quick one. $100 to the developer who puts in a spec F1 back in any modern racing game.
Absolutely.
Yes.
And that's one of the great things about GT2 is just like, and the lack of polish has something to do with it, but it's just so weird. Like, it had weird cars like the Espace F1. It had these tracks that like you could only get on the arcade mode disc. Like, it's just such a weird game, and I love it. Even the music's weird. Like, the Espace F1 is a perfect example of like the personality that GT2 had that I kind of want to, muscle its way back into the franchise one of these days.
I think that's a good way to put it.
All right, so number 2, we're moving on to Gran Turismo 4. This is my baby. This is one that I pushed for. I I don't think anyone here had this their number one like I did. But this is a game that, essentially it is a perfect jumping off point from GT2 because I feel like you're one of those people who like loves GT1, GT3, or you prefer GT2 and GT4 for being bigger, maybe having a bit too much content, but ultimately just like making the franchise into this like massive thing. And GT4, I didn't, and again, how old I was at the time definitely plays a lot into it. I think I was like 12 when GT4 came out, but like I didn't know about Group C. I barely knew about like Group B rally cars and like just the automotive, the eras of automotive history. I mean, when you're in the arcade mode, the game actually lets you scroll through a timeline of like, the first cars, the muscle car boom, the Japanese bubble car boom. And like, you can see through time how cars develop. And like, I mean, if you're an automotive nerd, it's just the coolest thing ever. There's, all of these real tracks that debuted in the series for the first time. Some people might have feelings about some of them, but I thought they were all great, even Infineon. And yeah, I just love how big this game was. It just felt like a celebration, but it wasn't. I would say that, where GT5 and GT6 got almost so big that they couldn't keep up that level of polish, I feel like Gran Turismo 4 was still able to feel like a complete polished experience despite its size. All right, who wants to back me up here?
Well, I was going to talk, but I'll let somebody back you.
I don't remember where I put GT4 either, but I can't argue with anything that you said, Adam. It really was sort of the GT2 idea just on PS2. And there's nothing wrong with that because I think that they did, borrowing from what Andrew said earlier, focus more on the polish on GT4 than with GT2, especially because they had 3.5 years or something, 4 years to develop it. So there was a lot of time there spent, and it was, the final product was really well done. It came very late in the system. They had a good idea of what they could do with the PS2. It brought a lot of important things to the franchise, like photo mode, which I still think is brilliant because it sort of turns players into advertisements of sorts for the game, getting all their best pictures. The Nordschleife was in there. It was really good, but I think it might have been too big. And I think my only criticism about it was that you had to hunt down these other cars. Like, it had 800 cars, and you wanted to drive them, but there was no incentive really in the game to look at most of them. You had to do it on your own, and I think that's where the bloat aspect comes in, where there's not an incentive to really focus in on all these wonderful and unique automobiles.
So for me, GT4, I mean, I love GT4 as well. I think it's second on my list. The bloat and the delay, and both of these things are things that we've had to deal with on the forum, as people make fun of the series for having 56 Nissan Skyline, or because it was a year and a half overdue, and then we end up with comical but slightly annoying memes of Gran Waitismo and the Soon and all that sort of thing. And GT4, I think, almost became a parody. And that sounds really harsh, given how I enjoyed the game. But it's that GT4 is the game that people think of when they think of of Gran Turismo getting too big, having too much, and possibly even unnecessary. So many Skylines, X5s. And it kind of tarnishes the memory a little bit.
Yeah, I get that, but at the same time, I mean, maybe it was because I feel like, some people in this room were definitely in the thick of it when that game came out. And, I mean, Andrew and Jordan, you guys definitely probably endured a lot of tired jokes about how long that game took to came out and all the proto memes and everything. I can only imagine.
Well, nothing. GT5 overshadows everything in terms of complaints.
That's true.
That's absolutely 100% the case that GT5 does take the crown on
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I get all that, and this is definitely the start of some habits that Polyphony would kind of fall into that have not aged well, and that it took them until I think GT Sport to realize that they needed to sort of modernize their practices and their approach and their priorities. And I get all of that, but the one thing that I was thinking of, I was like, in the run-up to the show, was trying to like crystallize my thoughts and just come up with a counter argument to like the whole bloat point. And that was just that, like, when I look at games like GT5 and 6, I feel like those games are very bloated, but in a different way. Like, GT4 is bloated in the way that it has more cars than you could ever drive. It has events that you'll probably never finish. GT5 and 6 is bloated in like that, except for the fact that you wouldn't want to drive the 800 standard cars, and you wouldn't want to play the Gran Turismo Rally, which has like the worst procedurally generated tracks that I have ever seen in any racing game ever. The Sebastian Loeb Rally Challenge, the Grand Tour, like you don't want to do these things. You know, GT4 is a problem of excess because you wish you had time to do it. You don't even want to in the future games. So to me, there's a difference between good bloat and bad bloat. And with GT4, it was almost like rewarding because I never 100% anything. It's just always a problem I have. But like with GT4, it's like I thought I had, maybe after a year or 2 years, I thought I had seen pretty much everything I wanted to see of the game. And I feel like a couple months later, I would find out about this car I didn't know existed, and luck would have it was in GT4. I'd be like, you know what? I'm going to play GT4 again. I'm going to turn that on because I want to drive that car. Or like, it just like, I feel like it's a game that like it was immediately special, but as time went on, something kept drawing me back to it, and I would always keep discovering new things, and that's kind of the last way I felt that way about Gran Turismo.
Well, point number one, I'll have you know, Jeff Gordon's zombie AI taught me how to do one corner at Daytona. And point two. Good times. Up there with Jay Leno saying start in GT.
Oh god, I forgot about that.
No reason.
Start.
That was the extent of his input.
Oh man, that was funny.
Fantastic. But on Gran Turismo 4, to draw comparisons to another series, a lot of people see Sonic Adventure as ground zero for that series.
That you're bringing it back to
maybe
Sonic.
The development, I always do. The development practices in that game would then go on to affect all the other ones because they felt they needed a serious story. All the crap that doesn't really matter, and by setting the standard so high in terms of content in Gran Turismo 4 and the encyclopedia stuff, it meant like realistically, and this is how it basically transpired. Polyphony would need to try and replicate that on PlayStation 3 to avoid disappointing people. So the way I see it is like GT4, whilst it's still pretty good in my opinion, and I do have some issues with the handling engine, but putting that to the side, I feel as if it's when the series started to get a bit too derivative, and although GT4 is fine, I still think based on the trajectory that would then happen and introduce standard cars and stuff, it's almost like it started the kind of the darker period for the series, despite the fact the games that would come after, in my opinion, were still really good, but a lot of people would say otherwise.
I agree with you completely. Yeah, I think Gran Turismo 4 was it was a fantastic game, and I think, Adam, you really summed it up with like the bloat, because like when we look at the problems with GT5 and GT6, like the bloat just kind of, it's like, it's like the ooze, this goo that's just like this feature creep that just kind of starts kind of overtaking everything and weighs down the whole experience. That sort of started with GT4, and you had a lot of great features that came from that game, like photo mode. I think that's one we would all agree is sort of a landmark feature. But like I thought it felt very different to GT3 and GT2 and then the original. But I definitely felt like the series was going in a new direction. That Brendan called it a darker period, which sounds a little grim, but I do understand what you're saying, and it definitely sort of changed the characteristics of the series, and I think there were some things that Polyphony should have looked at with that game, and instead of saying, okay, we're going to double down on just throwing everything at these games, instead of doing that, they should have said, okay, like let's not get any more ambitious than Gran Turismo 4, and like let's try to develop and deliver a game that is of this quality. Try out, maybe one or two little things, but like let's keep it in check. I think that's sort of when Polyphony started to just get drunk on adding crazy, features and having a bigger body of content than what the game itself could actually handle or support. That's with GT2, it felt like there was a lot of content, and it felt like he pretty much had a good opportunity to use all of it. And GT3, it's not much of a game, so of course, there was plenty of you could use everything in it. But in GT4, it just felt like there was so much. But on the flip side, like you said, Adam, I think it was a game that you could come back to years and years later and just be like, oh, I want to check out that car because maybe you saw one on the street or something, and you're like, oh, that's in GT4. I want to see it. I personally did not play GT4 with the intensity that I did GT2 or GT3, but it came out like right when my senior year of high school and college and all that stuff, so I was really busy and stuff, and so I didn't play it as intensely, but I did revisit it a lot after its release. More so, I revisited it more so than I've revisited GT5 or GT6. The Nürburgring alone, I think, that's where I did most of my laps on the ring, is in GT4. So it definitely has a lot going for it, but it did sort of feel like Polyphony turned a corner with that game.
Well, one feature that had a special kind of meaning for me was the LAN mode, because we would, over here in the UK, we set up a bunch of LANs where we would all gather together in the same place and hook 6 machines up together and race Gran Turismo. We had something like 15 events spread over about 4 or 5 years where we'd get a bunch of nerds together from all over the UK and sometimes from further abroad. So, I mean, one of our moderators, GT Planet, who lives over in San Francisco these days, he came over, had some guys coming from Belgium and the Netherlands. We would all just sit in a rented bit of a pub and play Gran Turismo together. Competitions that we'd all thought up on, from the 600 odd cars and 50 odd circuits, and we would more or less never do the same race twice. And it was Gran Turismo turned social in much more of a personalised way than the online does these days.
That's a really fun thing to imagine, and there is a certain charm that's lost in this age where we can just like play these games online. And I mean, it's great for connecting people, but also that is really cool to think about. I don't think I've ever played any game in like a LAN capacity, like just going to a friend's house or something like that, bring my console, having an extra TV or something like that. But yeah, I mean that's cool. The one thing that Brendan touched on a while ago that I think it's the only fair criticism that I will not. These are all, everything you're saying is fair. This is the only criticism I will accept, which is that I agree with. Which is that the physics definitely, GT4 definitely does not have the same kind of personality, the drive that GT3 had.
I was going to mention that part too, about the physics being, when you look at every GT at the time that it was released, GT4 is the odd one out where it wasn't sort of a step forward in physics, it was one back. All the other ones have been solid evolutions, and then that was the odd man out. But the other thing I was going to mention that a few of us have touched on with GT4 is that idea that we kept going back to it. And I'm guilty of it too. but I hate to be that person, but there's a reason that we all had to revisit it so much over the years.
Because we had it for a long time.
That is definitely fair. We got like 3 Forza games in the span between GT4 and GT5, so
Yeah, it was about 15 years till Gran Turismo 5 came out.
Yeah, generations of families had evolved.
did we seriously all believe it
Eons.
would ever happen? Like, there had to be a day where we're just like, you know what? Maybe this is just going to be it. Like,
I think that moment, I think the one that always stands out to me in the pre-GT5 hype, because it was massive, and Jordan and Andrew will attest to that in numerous ways. I think the one thing that really hurt was the one interview where Yamauchi saying we can release whenever we want, and that was a solid year and a bit before it actually released.
yeah, that's rough. That's there was that, and I also remember him saying, I mean, he said so many things over the years, but like, you know, even when this game comes out, it's still going to be like 40% of what I want to do with the series. And it's just like twisting that knife like ever so deeper.
Yeah, I think that actually the reason that the Gran Turismo 5 isn't in this conversation as much as like GT2 and GT4 and GT3 is because it was so tainted by its pre-release buildup. You know, like we just had these impossible expectations for the game, and you know, we all thought that it was going to be GT4 on PS3, you know, with online play and, you know, with just amazing graphics, HD graphics and all that stuff. And we had GT5 Prologue, which was, you know, good and exciting. And then it just took forever. And when I think of GT5, I don't think of the game. I think of the pre-release hype and human drama and, you know, how angry people were. Of course, that's coming from my perspective because GT5, I just like, I breathed that game for every day for like 2 to 3 years, because every day I would just get up and write blog posts about it on GT Planet. So, you know, so I really had like a front row seat into all of that drama and that roller coaster that was GT5. Now, I brought a lot of people to GT Planet, so a lot of people will say they discovered the site, you know, when they were coming to read about, you know, the GT5, just to find out when the release date was going to be or when it had been moved to next. But but I think that it kind of all of that kind of overshadows what the game really was. Although the game did have a lot of issues on its own. I'm not saying that, but it hurt it for sure.
And there was a GT4 online.
Yes.
What, 3 years earlier? And if they'd have released that as a full game rather than as a extremely limited release to certain people in Japan and the USA, that would have been enough.
Yeah. And I think that the problem too with GT4, you know, Brenda mentioned the darker period, you know, and I feel like the reason that we feel that way is because things sort of kind of got weird after GT4. Because if you think about it, we had Tourist Trophy after GT4, which was basically GT4 with bikes. And it's like suddenly Polyphony kind of got distracted. Because up until that point, they were like, make the next Gran Turismo game, make the next Gran Turismo game, make the next Gran Turismo game. Then after GT4 came out, it was like, let's do Gran Turismo but with bikes, you know, which is not a bad idea, but the studio is so small and so focused that they really kind of struggled to handling these things. So, you know, Tourist Trophy was great and all that. And then, you know, then we had, you remember Gran Turismo HD with the promise of you know, and it was going to have bikes and it was going to be like online and it was going to have like all of this stuff. You know, there's that legendary Kazunori Yamauchi presentation at, I think it was at TGS. And there's a screenshot and it basically has a feature list of everything that would eventually come to Gran Turismo Sport.
A livery editor.
Yes, a livery editor, license plate editor. I mean, there was like online like leagues and stuff, like all of that. Like it would eventually come like 12 years later. or I guess 15 years later, maybe. But then we had Gran Turismo HD, and then it was like, okay, well, what's that? And then it came out as like this weird little one-track demo when the PlayStation 3 was released, and then they kind of canceled the game, and then we had GT5 Prologue, and then it was kind of like all of this like weird stuff. They kind of took their eye off the ball, and each one of those things was interesting and good on its own. But I think if Kazunori could go back in time, I think he would. I hope that he would probably say, "Look, instead of focusing on all these side projects, we just need to focus on making the next game as great and as polished as it should be." And maybe Gran Turismo 5 should have come out a lot earlier and should have been a very different game. Gran Turismo 5, it should have been out much sooner, and I think that would have helped the series. And I think that's sort of why we entered that dark period that Brendan is talking about.
Yeah, I totally agree with what you're saying, Jordan, because I think Polyphony's work after 4 as well became what they were known for almost. So when you think about the kind of release hype to 5, like I was one of them. There were people just watching E3, Sony's E3, to see if Gran Turismo 5 would turn up. People were losing their shit because Kevin Butler did a Gran Turismo 5 commercial at one point. Like, people loved that stuff. And there was just anything Gran Turismo 5, people were just like scooping it up. It was getting on the mainstream websites. It was generating mad traffic. People thought it was going to be the next big thing because of like this feature list you're saying that got released, and then the screenshots that showed like the Mini Cooper with a small sticker on its back, like the rear, and people were like amazed to see that. Like, that's how big the series was. Something as like insignificant as that could be in another game didn't really matter. But if it was Gran Turismo, well, Jordan, you'll know it yourself, being the leader of the website. GT Planet went crazy for stuff like that, and it almost felt unthinkable to imagine if Kazunori had come out and said, "We feel as if we have to really dial back in scope here." So maybe it was that pressure that was ever growing, and then there's never a good time to cut content. It's just unfortunate that it's viewed as a negative always, even if it results in a better product. And the thing about Gran Turismo Sport is, I really feel as if it sets up the next game really well, because if you can take those sport elements that have been made in this game and incorporate that into a full Gran Turismo experience, that's going to be a hell of a game. And it probably wouldn't have happened if GT7 had followed the blueprint of what GT6 was, if we're going to be honest.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah, I honestly thank God for Gran Turismo Sport for kind of like refreshing everything and just, hitting the reset button on the series. I think it needed that. Polyphony was at a completely directionless point, it seems like, after GT4. I love Tourist Trophy, and all of my friends that ride and are really into motorcycles, they all pretty much still consider Tourist Trophy their favorite motorcycle racing game of all time. I mean, I think it's a genre that hasn't ever really gotten the attention it deserves, but Tourist Trophy was that, and it's great. But GTHD, GTPSP too, which we completely forgot about. There's so many side projects and things that took attention away, that you could argue the series probably suffered for, went through those dark days for sure. But yeah, I think that pretty much explains the sort of this was about GT4, but those habits that start with GT4 influence GT5, kind of set Polyphony on this cycle that they would always have to outdo themselves in terms of the number of cars and the number of tracks and how big the game was. And the next game on our list, which is of course GT3, was the total opposite of that, which is why when you go back and play GT3, it's just like, it is, as much as I love GT4 and GT2, it does kind of put you at ease to know, like, here's the game, this is it, and it's just like that perfect balance of like content and purpose. It's not bloated, it's not bare bones, it's just right. I do wish that the car roster was always like a sore point for me, because I just feel like it wasn't very interesting. But otherwise, I mean, what can we say about this game that we have not said before?
Jordan could admit that it's the best game in the series. That's something he hasn't said before.
And it's not going to happen. Not going to happen because it's not. It's not. It's Gran Turismo 3 is an excellent, awesome, superb racing game. It is not the best Gran Turismo game. And those are two different things. Gran Turismo 3 is excellent on its own for what it is, and I think it was such a leap forward in terms of graphics and technology at the time. I mean, that game aged so incredibly well. It still looks great by anyone's standards. They just did a phenomenal job with that, and it was very fun to play, but it's not Gran Turismo 2. It did not draw me in like GT2 did. Like, I remember playing GT3 and thinking, wow, this looks amazing. This is a lot of fun. And then I was like, oh, okay. Like, well, that's pretty much it. Like in GT2, I loved taking, a cheap, small Japanese car and tuning it, maybe putting one of the race modifications on it and trying to beat these other cars and, feeling like I was traveling all over the world doing these, cool races and stuff. And in GT3, I just sort of felt like I was playing a really, really good racing game. So I don't think that it is big enough or Gran Turismo enough to really qualify as the absolute best game in the series. Heck, even in the name itself, it admits it's not a full game. Like, are we still waiting for Gran Turismo 3 B spec? Like why is it called A spec?
That was something I actually wanted to point out with regard to GT4 is that, like, I was one of those only weirdos who liked B spec. I mean, like, I used it to do the 24-hour race and stuff because of course I did. Yeah, it is weird that we never got that GT3 A spec.
Yeah, I mean, it was part of the title, the official title of the game is Gran Turismo 3 A spec. Like, what? Like, what does that? I still don't even really know what that means. Why is it called A spec and B spec? Like,
there was supposed to be a separate management sim, Gran Turismo 3. So I think Yamauchi has actually explained this at some point, possibly around GT5. That there was actually supposed to be like a football manager, championship manager, that sort of game, but for Gran Turismo. And then obviously that mode then became part of GT4. I'm not sure how well it would have worked as a standalone game, but
couldn't have been worse than Gran Turismo for boys.
Oh,
Oh wow!
Oh yeah, that.
Deep cut.
our April Fool's Day spoof motorboat racing game, Gran Turismo for buoys.
Well, I think Turn10 did that with Forza 3 or 4, right? They said that they were gonna make like a Forza like water sport or something something like that. If I remember correctly, those dark days of Forza games, I guess, in the late 2000s.
Oh yeah, the early ones. Those were rough. About B-Spec, just quickly, I want to mention that one because we did skip over it with GT4. I agree with Adam that B-Spec actually was a pretty interesting addition, but specifically in GT4 because it was way worse in the later games because you couldn't actually switch out with your drivers.
Okay. So in spite of everything that GT5 is my least favorite game in the franchise. I can't stand it. In spite of all the issues I have with that game, and in spite of the fact that B-Spec in GT5 is you're not actually managing anything. You just like tell your avatar to go out and you watch a replay. It's so dumb, but I love that I could make my avatars who I had no control over race my friends and then get money for. It was so stupid. Like, you weren't doing anything, but I would just watch my horrible B-Spec Bob just like totally make a fool out of himself on the racetrack and then like I would think I'd lost the race, and then I watched my friend's B-Spec driver just like completely do something even stupider. It was so entertaining for me. Like B-Spec in GT5 was great. I wish they would combine the depth of fours, which, I mean, in retrospect, you look at games today on like mobile, like Motorsport Manager and stuff. It's like GT4's B-Spec wasn't even really that deep compared to what you can see now. But combine that with the ability to race other people's avatars, I feel like that would be a great game or a great mode. I would totally be into that.
I do recall there was one, whatever the equivalent back then of daily races were, that was just for B-Spec.
Yeah. In GT5.
Yeah. That was mad. I loved that. It was brilliant. I think it was at Le Mans, wasn't it?
There were different ones, right? And yeah, it was great because it was an alternative to the current rubber banding approach of making money in a game. It's just stick your B-Spec bobs on it, and then you come back after a day at work and see, oh, I have this much money. Thanks, Bob.
Yeah.
I amassed an entire team of drivers with the same last names as Formula One champions, but different first initials. So
mine was O. Simpson, so unfortunately that was awkward. He could never drive any white Ford Broncos.
Oh no. And this was GT5, so there was probably a white Ford Bronco somewhere in the game code that we just never saw.
The 4 editions of white Broncos, yeah.
Yeah, there was the Midnight Purple edition as well.
Yeah, Eddie Bauer edition.
Yeah, I mean we're getting away from GT3
because there's not much to talk about because it was such a small game.
So I found my rankings when we did the article in GT Planet, and I was one of the smart people who put GT3 at the top. And Jordan said something way back on GT2 when we were talking earlier about how that was a milestone moment, and that is exactly what I think about with GT3, and in fact the whole franchise, where I remember going to the store to pick up GT3 on release day and seeing it in motion on a screen was jaw-dropping. It was a moment that I've never experienced since with the franchise, where the jump from the visuals from GT2 to GT3 was just a whole other level.
Yeah, here's the thing where, Jordan, I agree with you. GT3 is not my favorite either. It is limited on content to a point where it kind of hurts it. That said, you have to give GT3 props for being like, I mean, Polyphony are regarded as like technical experts, right? You know, I mean, granted, they have first party backing. They can pretty much do whatever they want. And at a certain point, they got to be able to design the new PlayStation hardware for crying out loud. But they know what they're doing. And I think GT3 is the epitome of polyphony. And you know, there have been interviews I've seen, you know, on GT Planet where Kaz digs into this and he just says, like, the stuff we were able to do, like with heat haze effects and just reflections and everything, like those things, like, we're amazed we're able to pull them off on the PS2, but like it was this perfect you know, meeting point of the hardware and the game design just being absolutely in lockstep with each other. And GT3 from a technical standpoint is, I think, like one of the greatest achievements in the history of video games. Like when you play it, especially when you played it at the time, like I had the same experience as Kyle, just like I could not believe, like, up until this point, and especially as Sega fanboys that we are, Brendan, the PS2 was basically like, it was all hype. Like there was not a single game on the system that was like the Dreamcast couldn't do that, or like this is really what we waited for, like the cell processor and all this stuff. And it's like, you know, it was definitely a system where the hype exceeded what its actual capabilities ended up being, and everything we saw up to that point was pretty much pre-rendered cinematics and whatever. But GT3 was the first point where I looked at the PS2 and I was like, wait, hold on, like this does feel like a generational leap. And although it's a bit of a side thing, it's important to note that this game came out, I think, in like the spring in the US or the early summer. And then in a couple of months, Grand Theft Auto 3 came out. And this was like, from that moment, the PS2 was just, it won the generation. Like, I think GTA 3 was the best-selling game. Gran Turismo 3 was the second best-selling game. Like,
no, I agree completely. Yeah, I mean, GT3 was a definitive game, and it was one of the main, like you said, perfectly summed it up. I think GT3 is one of the main reasons that the PlayStation 2 was so dominant, and there were so many. Basically, everybody had one, and most people had a copy of GT3. Like GT3 is the only game. It's the only Gran Turismo game that I've ever seen someone else playing that like I didn't know. And it was in my dorm room. Like I was walking by like my neighbor's room and I saw him playing some video games and they were playing GT3. And like I didn't know him or anything. Like we didn't like I'd never met. Like that's the only time I've ever seen someone playing a GT game. Like just that I didn't know. And like I think the reason that it sold so well was because of this jaw-dropping moment that we keep talking about. Like when you walk in a store and they have it playing on the demo, you're like, what? I have got to have that. And everybody was like, I want a PS2 and I want GT3 because that is the craziest looking thing I've ever seen. And I don't think we'll ever have a moment like that in video games again, because the graphics are just so good now. Like, I mean, we may, I probably shouldn't say that, because we may have some incredible generational leaps in our future. But I mean, at the time, I mean, it was 2001. Graphics, 3D graphics, and computers were really, really, really starting to accelerate and take off, and nobody had ever seen anything like that. And I do think that was a big reason that it sold so well. And it was sort of a perfect storm of Polyphony and Kazunori Yamauchi able to just really focus on making the very, very best looking game that they could. And the result was incredible. And it is the reason that Gran Turismo and Polyphony Digital is sort of considered to be the studio which sets that benchmark for graphic, fidelity and that sort of thing. I won't say sound fidelity; I'll say graphic fidelity. But but GT3 is the reason that everybody feels that way, I think.
You say it's the only game you've seen someone else playing. It's the only game I've seen. It's the only racing game I've seen characters in a television show. It actually appears in an episode of Stargate SG-1.
Isn't that supposed to be like 200 years in the future or something, though?
Oh no, it's all set in Colorado at present day.
Oh, okay.
No,
Never mind.
Explains it.
Also, too, because I mean, this is Time Extend, so we have to give credit to the game soundtrack. I mean, Gran Turismo has always, at least with the original music in the game, between Daiki Kasho and everyone who's contributed over the years, it's always had a pretty good score. But GT3's was like the first one that, I mean, it's the one I feel like I return to more than any other in the series, because like the Car Dealer, like there's so many songs that stand out to me. The Car Dealer Select, the arcade mode, Slipstream, Light Velocity. Those are songs. Even the Tune Shop, it just like gets you going. It's like really fast.
Well, I think that GT3 had the best sort of like menu music, and I think GT2 had the best like real music, like for me, like the background music when you're actually playing. I'm trying to remember any song from GT3. I remember all of the menu music really well, but like with GT2, I'm thinking of like Dragula, by Rob Zombie, the Cardigans losing my favorite game. It was just it just had a really good soundtrack of like sort of late 90s vibes, and it was like the car selection, and it was like a lot of songs that I didn't really hear on the radio, and so it kind of like opened my ears to a new world of different genres of music as well. So I got to give GT2 credit for that. Obviously it's the best game in the series, so it got the music right too. But
late 90s music is so depressing. GT3, Jimi Hendrix, Muse, Motley Crue, Feeder, She Sells Sanctuary's on there as well, Snoop Dogg.
Exactly. How have we not mentioned Snoop's Turismo 3?
99 Red Balloons.
Yeah.
Yeah, see, I don't know,
Goldfinger.
those music that music just didn't land for me personally. I'm just like, yeah, I don't know. I didn't get it. But I know I'm probably in a minority for in terms of that. But I like GT2's
I'm
better.
like you. I'm like you, Jordan. 90s alternative. I have two older brothers who are both in their 40s now. So growing up, I exclusively listened to like grunge and like alt rock and stuff.
That old.
So, well, yeah, but so definitely having garbage and stuff on the GT2 soundtrack was great.
Yeah.
But with GT3, like, yeah, I was thinking of menu music, and I don't know about the M-Race music, although you get Mirage and Skyscraper. Like, those are two awesome songs. Skyscraper is like maybe my favorite Daiki Kasho song still after all these years. It's so good.
He had a lot of good songs.
Right.
Another thing I wanted to mention about GT3, because we're still, confirming that it is the best game. One thing that it's missing that GT2 had, a bunch of boring mid-range cars. I know that the lineup was small and possibly a little too small and not varied enough compared to what we got in other installments, but there wasn't really a bad car in that selection. Also, we got the Zonda. I'm pretty sure GT3 was the very first game that the Zonda showed up in, which sort of set the tone for the next decade when it became such a big thing. And we also had those F1 cars, which were obviously based on real cars, but not called by their real names.
Because there's now more Pagani Zonda Special Edition. There are Nismo Skylines in Gran Turismo 2. But yeah, no, the colours in GT3, it does tend to go from slow to reasonable to extremely fast. I mean, there was still room for like some crazy stuff. So, obviously the Pikes Peak Escudo, that was still in there. You had still had that Tommy Kyra ZZ2 or ZZ2 if you're listening. XR8 Falcon V8 supercar, that was still in there, although it didn't have anything to go with it, which is a bit weird.
Yeah.
It kind of Carl's right. It did kind of do both ends.
That's the not having anything to go with the Falcon XR8 is my issue with GT3's car list. I actually I'm not a huge fan of it. It's because it goes to some places that I like. It's like, oh, the 787B, that's wild. I've never seen that in the game before. There's no other Group C car in that game. There's no other V8 supercar in that game. There's no other, and it's like I feel like you kind of need at least two. It's like you need a good balance of some kind. And I feel like they were also sort of they were for a while. Polyphony was kind of late to coming out with putting new models in their games. Like, this is going to go back to GT4, so maybe it's more problem with GT4 and GT3, but I remember when that game came out in 05, other games had the C6 Corvette, GT4 didn't. GT3 it didn't have the new Viper. I just remember I'm having a tough time thinking of specific models, but it always seemed like GT3's car list was maybe a year or two older than it should have been. It didn't have enough of the latest stuff, but also it kind of occasionally had some classics or legendary race cars, but didn't do enough in that department. But I guess the issue too is it's 180 cars, so you have to be really careful about what you're prioritizing there, and you're never going to make everyone happy.
Yeah, I mean, it had the concept of which had been carried over
right.
from the GT3 concept earlier in the year, but it didn't have the current generation on.
I'm trying to stick up for you there, Jordan.
Well, yeah, personally I enjoy more of the mid-range cars. I mean, what I loved about Gran Turismo 1 and 2 was the fact that, I could take a four-door sedan racing and race it against other pedestrian cars that you'd see every day. Things that didn't look that exotic. And I had a lot of enjoyment. I derived a lot of joy out of, I sort of learned momentum in GT2, and figuring out how to get the most out of these cars that weren't necessarily built to go really fast around a racetrack. And With GT3, there were a lot of more like really, really fast cars. Like they were either, kind of like really slow or really fast. And even today, like I find myself driving slower mid-range cars like in GT Sport than I do driving, these really overpowered, not overpowered, but they're race cars, that are designed to go really fast. And yeah, they're fun, but to me, like I get a lot more satisfaction out of making something go fast that's not really intended to go fast. And I feel like those cars have a bit more, because they're not so high strung, they have a bit more character in terms of how they feel in the game as well. So for me, having a larger selection of normal everyday cars in games like GT2 and even GT4 to an extent is a good thing.
I just wish there were less K cars.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love a K car.
We were talking about it on the last episode.
Yeah.
I love K cars too, but I probably the lightweight K Cup challenge or whatever was like the last thing I ever did in that game, because I can only spend so many minutes behind the wheel of a Daihatsu Storia X4 before I just have to do anything else.
Well, they're too slow. They really are too slow. And the greatest car, of course, in Gran Turismo 2 was the Daihatsu Midget 2. So,
Oh, yeah.
great,
Yeah.
maybe the greatest car ever to
agree.
appear in a Gran Turismo game. Let's be honest.
Apart from the pink Yaris.
What's that?
The pink Yaris, which was a special prize car for the special stage Route 11 endurance in GT3.
Yeah. But it didn't have the utility of the Daihatsu Midget. With the spare tire on the front, come on.
You could probably fit a midget into the trunk of the bits.
As much as I love the midget, I really preferred GT4, including the original 60s one with the 3 wheels. That was even
That was
cooler.
brilliant.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
really cool.
So again, defending GT3's honor here.
Well,
Jordan, sorry, go ahead, Adam.
No, I was just going to say real quick, Jordan mentioned Special Stage Route 11, which is one of the best things GT3 has going for it. I don't know why Polyphony won't put that track, or hadn't put that track in more games at that time, but SSR 11's so good.
GT1 version or GT3 version?
The GT3 version it didn't have that stupid chicane, right? That was like the main difference.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'll take the one without the stupid chicane. Also, like when you're above ground, seeing like the Ferris wheel and everything is like so cool with the line trees. Yeah.
That's fair. And that sort of chicane, like the chicane of death, would just never exist on a modern track anyway. It was a design. It was so emblematic of a 90s PS1 racing game.
Those are days where, the reason those tracks had so many tunnels and high walls and crap is because they couldn't render that far in the distance. So,
exactly.
and which is funny then when you have so many people asking them to put Trial Mountain in GT Sport, and they're Kaz and probably some people who have been in Polyphony the longest are like, you want this? We were trying to get away from this. Even Valentino Rossi on Instagram is asking them to put Deep Force and Trial Mountain in GT Sport. It's incredible.
I think that stems from the fact that those are just really good layouts. I realized that the high trees were to protect the shortcomings of the platform at the time, but those were just fantastic tracks to race on, and importantly at all levels of performance too. Slower gentleman's agreement cars were fine there, and also fast race cars.
The battles I remember having with a friend in just the GT500 cars around Trial Mountain. Oh my God. And then you'd have an amazing lap, and then you would just nick the inside rock wall when you come out of that first tunnel, and that was your whole race gone.
Yeah.
Amazing times.
Or the popular tactic at Trial Mountain, if you really want the win and there's 2 cars ahead of you in that final S-bend, right through the grass.
Right. Just don't hit the overpass.
You can hit it in the right angle and it looks cool as well. So you can basically go on 2 wheels. That definitely something I tried doing in the GT1, which didn't end well.
also GT3, like we can't not mention complex string.
Yeah.
Do we have to?
I mean, so it's not a great track. It's really not especially from a racing perspective. I don't think you could even race on it, right? It was a time trial only.
We raced it in a LAN, and it was one of our most cherished memories from. You had to use an iLink back then. It wasn't regular networking equipment, but yeah, we raced the GT300 cars, and we went into the square corner section with 6 of us, and we came out completely different order to the one we'd gone in, but nobody had touched them.
Yeah, complex string is more that's nostalgia talking, where it's just like, whoa, this is such a huge track and it's so challenging, but it wasn't a great one. But I still just remember Yamauchi's time in the time trial mode, where you had to beat Polyphony members for each track, and of course his was the fastest time on the hardest track, and I just thought that was where Polyphony was actually trying to, show a personality. PS1 and like the PS1 games, they had a lot of content, and GT had its own personality, but we didn't really get an idea of the team behind it. And GT3 was sort of hinting at that, where we actually got to. It was just the ghosts of the players, or the developers, but at least it's something, and you sort of get this stronger connection, in my opinion.
It also allowed you to drive cars that were not available in the beginning of the game. Like I remember, I kept doing the Viper concept. If you can't tell, I really liked the Dodge Viper when I was a kid. I kept doing the Viper concept race at Laguna Seca. And because that was like the only way I could get the Viper when I wasn't very good at the game and couldn't actually like do many of even the beginner and intermediate class races. So yeah.
Oh, that's so sad.
Yeah. I was a kid. What do you want from me? But yeah, so that's I remember playing the time trial for that reason, and not even I might have known that you could like go against the developers, but I didn't really try too hard. I also never tried to gold any of the license tests because that just seemed too difficult. I was like, getting bronze or something was like all my like 10-year-old skills or capabilities could deliver.
I used to call 5-lap races endurance races when I was younger playing Gran Turismo. Oh my god, those extra 2 laps. How will I ever survive doing one race for 6 minutes?
Oh man.
Got to Gran Turismo 5 and I'm doing 24-hour enduros.
And actually, on that note, that's one of the other GT3 strength too. Is it had endurance races, it had that long F1 series, but it never felt, in my mind, it never felt like a grind where there was enough content matched to the number of races. So you never felt, except for the random car draw where prizes were only available in beating specific races. You could get everything in that game without dedicating literal months to it, which I think is important. It's a balance.
But you know what? I fucking hate that random car draw. That's like, oh my god.
Oh, it was the worst.
It killed me getting this. I think I got the Camaro LM at the Super Speedway one like almost every single time. It just like, oh no. That just brought back some PTSD.
It was really bad with the endurances, right? Because at least with the series, you could save before the last race, and if it didn't work, you just rerun the last race and get the car you want. But the endurances, no, you're at the mercy of that.
So glad they brought that back in GT Sport. It's a really great idea.
I love getting my 8th Renault Clio.
Yeah.
I was playing the other day. Everyone has these stories, but I'm pretty sure there were like out of the there's 4 cars in that, right? In the circle. And I think 3 of them were like at least above 8 million credits. And of course I got the Clio or the whatever hatchback was in there that I already have 4 copies of. So what are you gonna do? Yeah, I mean, I really wanted to come out and just like give GT3 the beating it deserved, but like it's when we talk about these memories and stuff, it's too precious. It's like I thought that this would be more I thought that Jordan and I would be more contrarian. I feel like it didn't really happen.
It's a great game. It's just not much of one.
Jordan did say that the cars stood the test of time, and they did, because they were still in GT6.
What a take.
And also, I don't want to be that person again. That's the second time I've said this on this show, but the sales numbers don't lie.
Exactly. And bundling did not make up for 65% or so of those sales.
No, not at all. That's just a random coincidence.
Yeah.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Definitely looked the other way on that one. It annoyed me because when they bundled it, I think they had changed the cover art, and I really love. Like, I think the Boxer 911 headlight. I mean, I guess technically it was the Roof 3400S, but we all know that they really shot a Boxer for that. That in the red is like, looks so good. It's like one of my favorite game covers ever, compared to the emblem on the back of the crappy Acura that we got in the US. It's so lame.
It's like such a minor thing, but I loved the fact that, and I'm not sure if it was like this in the US, but you could get a copy of Gran Turismo 3 in Europe that had a red like plastic cover, and then GT4 had a white one as well, and it just looked so cool and premium to have Gran Turismo with these special plastic cases. So like for Gran Turismo 3, I had the one that had the red plastic, the black plastic, and then the platinum version. I'm not sure why I bought all three, but that's just what Gran Turismo does to you as a series. Just buy loads of irrelevant stuff like test drive demos and stuff that were released in BMW dealerships, all of that cool stuff.
I've got about 12 versions of 4, so you're preaching to the choir.
Yeah, exactly.
Somebody on Twitter was saying, I hope you talk about GT Concept and GT PSP, and I was like, just hang on there for that episode. I feel like it'd be good to do an episode about like
The worst.
all the weird Gran Turismo, the worst, all the weird Gran Turismo one-offs. I mean, I only recently played GT Concept for the very first time, probably like a year or two ago. I found the copy and of like the Tokyo Motor Show one, I think, and yeah, it's good, but it's interesting how, especially because in the US we didn't get any of those games. Like GT5 Prologue was the first one we ever saw, so but everyone else did.
Yeah,
it was bizarre that the concept was never released. I mean, there was a special version for Korea.
Yeah.
10,000 copies. It was tied into the Seoul Motor Show, so it was a special version of called Tokyo Seoul 2002. But to release that for 10,000 copies and never release it in the USA, like people in America not interested in American concept cars.
Look, they needed to put the Spira motors, whatever it was, in the game so people could drive it, and whatever Hyundai concept car they had.
I would just love to know, like, I hope one day like Kazunori just like comes out and has like a tell-all documentary or writes a book or something, and we find out like why these really obscure versions of the games like existed, because I don't think that like he like now he won't do that, but like maybe one day he will. I don't know. I would just love to know why some of these things exist, because I'm sure there's probably some really entertaining stories behind all of this.
The Gran Turismo Mitsubishi Airtrek Turbo Edition, which is a thing.
Yes. Jordan, you say that, and I can't help but think that you are the man who is going to make that happen. Like, it's never going to happen otherwise. Like, you have to be, like Walter Isaacson was to Steve Jobs, you have to be that for Kazunori.
I would love to. The thought has crossed my mind. I've that one day, but I think he's still too secretive right now. He's still too secretive.
And he's still got a lot of work he wants to do, obviously. So,
yeah, and of course at the Nürburgring, he made those just a few months ago, and we interviewed him, and one of the journalists in our roundtable interview asked him about, like the older games, and he's like, yeah, I'm shocked that people still remember anything about the old games. He's like, no, I never go back and play those. Like, I only look forward. And everybody, like, there's like in the room, like among all the journalists there, like there was probably like 5 or 6 of us there, and we were kind of like, got like really awkward. And we're like, uh-oh. And I was like, oh, as soon as he said it, I was like, oh, this is gonna not go over so well. But maybe he read the response to that, and he's like, I'm gonna go back and take a look. And I think he should, because as I think we've established on this show, there's a lot to learn from these previous Gran Turismo games, and hopefully they take what they've built with GT Sport, and like you said earlier, Brendan or Adam, I can't remember which one of you mentioned it, but I think they're sort of in a good place now. I think Sport sort of sets up the next game to be in a really good spot.
It's pretty much the perfect base to work off of, and it's a worrying statement to say that, because I know we thought Gran Turismo 5 was going to be that as well. But the difference is now that it seems like Polyphony definitely have their kind of marbles, in the sense that they know what they want from the series, and they aren't trying to adhere to some astronomical number just to put it on the box, because we kind of briefly mentioned it after we'd forgotten about it, ironically. But Gran Turismo PSP, like, why did that even come out? Because it was pretty much just an asset dump with a minor game attached to it, and I still enjoy GT PSP a lot, but there's no doubt about it that it was pretty much, it feels like they almost had to put something on PSP, and that's why we ended up with that as opposed to GT4 Mobile. But I think everybody would have preferred what the initial game was going to be, even if it was just a retread of Gran Turismo 4.
Yeah, that's another game that I would love to know the real story behind it, because everybody pretty much forgot about it. I think Polyphony forgot about it, and then they must have gotten an email from like Sony corporate that said, yeah, when are you guys going to have that PSP game? And they're like, oh crap, like we got to put this together like now, guys. Like let's like, we have to work on this.
But then why was the Valencia circuit?
What's that, Andrew?
Why was the Valencia circuit in it? It was basically GT4 and Valencia from T2 from
Yep.
And
I forgot about that.
I could not think of. I hate that track. I absolutely detest Valencia. I could not think of a worse track for them to. If they were going to spend it on one extra track in that game, why did it have to be Valencia?
Why Valencia?
I mean, I know because it was in Tourist Trophy, but jeez.
Of course, we're sitting here complaining about it. It's going to be the next track in GT Sport.
Does MotoGP even still go there? I don't even know. I guess not.
Nah, I don't know.
There was that. There was Valencia, and then there was a handful of new cars. Some of them were coming to GT5, and then there was the Veyron, which was standard for some unknown reason. And the weirdest one was the Mazda Excella, the Mazda 3. That was in GT PSP, but never in GT3 or 4.
Well then, a great addition.
Why? No one knows.
Yeah, I mean, it's like when Lotus disappeared out of GT Sport after the beta. It's just like, it's always with the weirdest brands. You know, the Toyota thing has been a very high profile thing everyone's paying attention to, but like, why did talks break down with, Lotus? Like, it's just weird to think about.
Yeah, I would love to know that stuff.
From what I understood, because I have had a chat with Lotus, they saw. I'm going to have to be quite careful with my words here. They were having the deal that they had reduced its value over time, and so with the delay over a year in GT Sport coming out, the value of the contract, the agreement they had, went down. So they thought they were getting less money than other comparable manufacturers, which I assume to be McLaren. And I believe that's the source of the dispute. I don't know how accurate that is, but that's what I understood.
Yeah, I mean, makes sense to me.
Yeah.
Like I would have hoped that they would be able to iron out the new kind of deal, because at least the Evora exists in that game.
Yeah, I think there was an Elise as well in some of the
Yeah.
But it would be a great manufacturer to have, because it has some of the older GT1 cars that are now classed as Group 3s. It's got current GT4 cars which are classed as Group 4s. It would slot straight into the manufacturer.
And with all the classic cars in Lotus's history, I mean, that would be great for everything that they're putting in the game now.
Yeah.
I think that settles why it won't happen then. It makes too much sense.
Yeah. Wow. Well, I don't want to cut anyone off, but we're going on like an hour 40 at this point. I apologize if you all had things to do today. But no, this was absolutely amazing. This was a lot more diplomatic than I thought it would be, which I guess is a good thing. I don't know. Yeah, let's call it a good thing. Everyone's a little too angry on the internet these days. So yeah, I love having this chat with everyone here. So glad everybody could join us. And I guess yeah, Jordan, let us know what's going on with GT Planet. There's an FIA event coming up this weekend, the weekend after this show posts on hopefully in the middle of the week, in New York. And yeah, what's going on?
Yeah, it's gonna be a big event. I feel like the World Tour is really sort of getting into its stride at this point, and basically from here through the end of November, we're gonna have a World Tour event every month. So we're going to be doing a lot of coverage on all these events. And then got a little announcement of my own coming here with GT Planet. That's all I'm going to say. But keep an eye out. There's something that, Andrew and Kyle know what I'm talking about, but it's...
So the Kaz tell-all was definitely a Freudian slip then.
Yes.
Jordan, I'm really sorry, but I'm going to spoil it right now. It's actually a special GT Planet edition of a Camry 2.2.
Oh,
yes!
Oh, man. Stealing the thunder, man. Oh, gosh. But yeah, I feel like the rest of the year is just going to be... It's going to be really, really crazy on GT Planet with like all the FIA GTC stuff and all of the blankety blank coming up soon. But yeah, it's exciting times. I'm going to be super, super busy, but definitely keep an eye on the site because it's going to be a lot of fun, I hope.
Yeah, it'd be great as well to get some audio companions to the type of stuff that's going on, maybe just to discuss how it goes at these World Tour events and stuff. I'm sure the listeners would really enjoy that as well. So I don't think collaborations between the two of us are going to end anytime soon.
Yes, no, absolutely. And hoping to see Adam in New York. So
Yes, I will be there. It's going to be my first time at a GTC FIA event. I'm very excited. As soon as I found out I would be able to go, it was like, wait, which one of you? One of you's going. One of you has to go. So I'll be seeing Jordan there. And yeah, if anyone listening to this is going to be there, come say hi. I'll be the guy who's probably wearing an Outrun shirt or a Sega M2 hat or something like that. So can't miss me.
Don't let Jordan win another media race. He's got like a whole fleet of TGTs at this point.
Oh my god!
I'm not invited anymore because I beat him at the last one.
He did. Yeah, I fired you after that one. Too. Yeah, I've had to fire Andrew like 6 or 7 times now. So he's good enough that he gets rehired, but yeah, he's really screwed up a couple times.
Yeah, I'll try my best at the media race, but I can't make any guarantees. I mean, I feel like it would look pretty bad if GT Planet didn't win at the Gran Turismo FIA media race.
Yeah.
So just maybe I'm just trying to just get some pressure in there. Just start to play mind games. I'm hoping that like if I start the trash talk now, just like ever so subtly, by the time that the event comes, you'll just be like you won't be able to perform. So, yeah.
Oh, I'm used to having a target on my back. That's all right.
Man, you were the one that hit me.
Oh yeah, let's see. At the World Finals, last year, I was in first place going into the. I had pole position, and I was going into the first corner, and then it was on the Tokyo track in GT Sport, and every single car just like just hit me, and I was probably like 6 or 7 cars deep against the wall, like in the first corner. I went from first to last because everybody forgot that they need to hit the brakes to go around a hairpin corner. So they're like, we'll just all use Jordan as the brake and we'll just slam into him and go around. So it was like the dirtiest race I have ever been a part of. It was great.
The guy who won was wall riding the whole way, and they had boost and they were strong.
That was a mess of a race. I ended up hit so hard I was in the pit lane.
Wow.
I'm pretty sure there's like a funny video clip of you, Jordan, at the London reveal event where like you're in the middle of a race and something happens and you just like throw your hand up in there in disgust. And I remember like the GT Planet forums talking about that, and it was like the funniest thing.
Yeah, and they're like, "Oh, Jordan's so mad."
We gotta turn that into a GIF.
Yeah, it's out there. It's out there somewhere.
For it. Awesome. So lots of cool stuff to look forward to on GT Planet. And again, thanks to all of you for joining us for this. It was a lot of fun. As Brendan said, yeah, definitely have you guys back on for anything at any time. Just say the word. Yell at us about other games that you have opinions on. We don't care. It's all worth it. So,
yep, this was a great show. I really enjoyed this one. So thanks for having us on.
Thanks, you guys. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, cheers for putting up with me. Like Jordan has to.
you were the most measured and a lot like on the forums. You're the most measured and calm person in the group. So I think you definitely were like the anchor that we needed here.
It comes with my age.
Right.
The elder statesman.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for listening, and we will all be seeing you again soon.
Thanks, guys.
Cheers.